"I can smell your innocence," the beastly Duke growled, then promised to take it. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the weight of someone's past before they even spoke? We're told that first impressions matter, but what happens when that first impression is designed to frighten you away? When a man wraps himself in darkness because light has only ever brought him pain? Hazel Fairchild was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous beasts are the ones who've been wounded so deeply they've forgotten how to be human. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this tale of hidden hearts and hard-won trust, I'd be so grateful for a like or subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love that see past the armor we wear. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone whose reputation made you expect a monster, only to discover something entirely different? I read every note, and your insights always enrich these stories. Want a heroine named after you someday? Share your first name in the comments, and I'll start sprinkling them into future tales. 1. The corridor at Ravenscar Hall was darker than Hazel expected. Oil lamps flickered at intervals, casting more shadow than light across portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to judge her for getting lost. She'd been shown to her rooms barely an hour ago, but the need to escape the suffocating silence had driven her out to explore. She thought she'd found a side gallery. Instead, she nearly collided with a wall of warm muscle emerging from the shadows. Strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her. Hazel looked up into a face she could barely see. Hard jaw, the glint of intense eyes, a pale scar running along his neck like a question mark. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back, close enough that she could smell leather and something darker, like smoke and winter air. He leaned closer, and Hazel's breath caught as he inhaled deliberately near her hair. "I can smell your innocence," he said, his voice rough and low, almost mocking. He paused, his grip on her arms tightening fractionally. "And I will be the one to take it from you." The words hung in the air like a threat. Hazel's heart hammered against her ribs. She opened her mouth to respond, to demand he release her, to ask who he thought he was, but footsteps echoed down the corridor. A footman appeared with a lamp, the sudden light making Hazel blink. "Your Grace," the young man said, bowing nervously. "We've been searching for you. The steward needs—" "Later," the man said, releasing Hazel abruptly and stepping back. "Your Grace, Duke." Horror washed over Hazel in cold waves. This was him. This was Lucian Blackwood, Duke of Ravenscar, the man she was supposed to marry tomorrow, the man who'd just threatened her in the darkness like some villain from a Gothic novel. He looked at her properly, now in the lamplight, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, leaving Hazel shaking with shock and fury. The morning had started so differently. Hazel sat across from her mother at their cramped London breakfast table, pushing eggs around her plate, while Mrs. Fairchild read aloud from a letter written in expensive paper and precise handwriting. "The Duke of Ravenscar has made inquiries through his solicitor," her mother said, her voice brisk with barely contained excitement. "He seeks a bride from a sensible, quiet family, someone practical rather than ornamental. He has selected you, Hazel." Hazel's fork clattered against her plate. "He's selected me? Like choosing a horse at market?" "Don't be dramatic." Mrs. Fairchild set down the letter, her weathered face stern. "This is an extraordinary opportunity. The Duke of Ravenscar is one of the wealthiest men in England. His estates are vast, his income beyond comprehension, and he's chosen you. Why?" Hazel met her mother's eyes. "Why would a duke choose me? I'm 24, plain-faced, and have no dowry worth mentioning. What possible interest could he have?" Her mother's expression softened slightly, which somehow made the next words worse. "You are sensible, Hazel. You read, you think, you don't cause scenes or demand attention. You're exactly what a reclusive duke would want a wife, who won't drag him into society or create scandals. A practical arrangement." Practical. The word tasted like ash. Hazel had heard it all her life. Practical Hazel, who never made trouble. Sensible Hazel, who accepted reality without complaint. Plain Hazel, who never inspired poetry or passionate declarations. "What if I refuse?" Hazel asked, though she already knew the answer. Mrs. Fairchild's face hardened again. "Then we continue as we are, living on the charity of your uncle, watching every penny, hoping your younger sister can make a match before we're completely destitute. You've had no other offers, Hazel, and you won't. This is your chance to secure not just your future, but your family's. Don't let foolish pride make you throw it away." Hazel looked at her mother's tired eyes, at the threadbare curtains and the breakfast table that wobbled because they couldn't afford to repair it. She thought of her sister, sweet Margaret, who still believed in love matches and happy endings. "Very well," she said quietly. "I'll go." The coach journey to Ravenscar Hall gave Hazel too much time to think. She brought books to comfort herself, Jane Austen, and poetry collections she'd read until the spines cracked. But even Elizabeth Bennet's wit couldn't quite settle the churning in her stomach. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly what this marriage was, a transaction. He needed a wife who wouldn't interfere with his reclusive life. She needed security and escape from her mother's disappointed sighs. Love had nothing to do with it. But she'd imagined at least basic courtesy, respect, if not warmth. A business arrangement conducted with dignity. The man in the corridor had shattered that hope with 6 words. Ravenscar Hall appeared through the coach window like something from a dream, vast and beautiful. All dark stone and mullioned windows, perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. But as they drew closer, Hazel noticed the closed shutters, the overgrown gardens, the odd silence that hung over everything. The servants who greeted her were respectful but tense. They showed her to elegant rooms that felt unlived in, brought her tea she couldn't drink, and disappeared quickly when she tried to make conversation. She heard whispers as she explored that afternoon. The maids spoke in low voices around corners, always falling silent when she approached. But Hazel had learned to be invisible long ago. She knew how to hear things she wasn't meant to hear. "The beastly Duke," one girl whispered to another. "That's what they call him in the village. Says he ruined 3 lords financially and never showed an ounce of mercy. I heard he hates all fine ladies," another voice added. "His own mother." "Hush, she's coming." The maid scattered, leaving Hazel alone with her growing dread. Now, standing in her rooms after the encounter in the corridor, Hazel stared at her reflection in the mirror. Plain brown hair pulled back severely, grey eyes that were neither warm nor cold, a face that inspired words like pleasant and unremarkable. She'd agreed to marry a duke tomorrow, a duke who'd smelled her like prey and promised to take her innocence, whatever that meant. Hazel straightened her shoulders. She'd survived 24 years of being overlooked and underestimated. She'd endured her mother's disappointment and society's indifference. She would survive this too. The beastly Duke wanted to frighten her. Let him try. She'd been frightened by worse things than men who hid in shadows. She would marry him tomorrow. She would take his name and his security, and she would not let him see her crumble. But as she climbed into the unfamiliar bed, Hazel couldn't stop hearing his voice in the darkness. "I can smell your innocence, and I will be the one to take it from you." She pulled the covers up to her chin and tried very hard not to wonder what he'd meant. 2. Morning came too quickly. Hazel, dressed in her best gown, pale blue silk that had been her sister's, before being altered to fit Hazel's taller, less curved frame. Her hands shook as she pinned her hair, making her stab herself twice with hairpins. A maid knocked to announce that His Grace wished to meet with her before the ceremony. Hazel followed the girl through corridors that seemed less menacing in daylight, though no less imposing. The study was all dark wood and leather, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive desk positioned to face the door. Lucian Blackwood stood by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. In daylight, he was nothing like the shadow creature from last night. He was simply a man, tall and broad-shouldered, yes, but human. Dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples. A well-cut coat that spoke of wealth but not ostentation. When he turned, she saw the scar along his jaw, clearly now, a pale line that somehow made his already striking features more memorable. He was, Hazel realized with an uncomfortable flutter, quite handsome. "Miss Fairchild," he said, his voice as controlled as his posture. "Please, sit." Hazel remained standing. "I prefer to stand, Your Grace." Something flickered in his eyes' approval. "Perhaps, as you wish." He moved to his desk but didn't sit either. "I owe you an apology for last evening. My comment was ill-judged and inappropriate. I dislike surprises, but that doesn't excuse frightening you." "You didn't frighten me," Hazel lied smoothly. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Didn't I?" "You startled me. There's a difference." Hazel lifted her chin. "And if you dislike being crept up on, perhaps you shouldn't lurk in dark corridors. I shall endeavour to creep more audibly in future." Now he did smile, brief and unexpected. It transformed his face entirely, making him look younger and less forbidding. "I shall appreciate the warning." The smile faded. Lucian gestured to 2 chairs by the fireplace. "We should discuss the terms of our arrangement before we proceed." This time, Hazel sat. Lucian took the chair opposite, careful to maintain a proper distance. "I don't attend balls or London seasons," he said without preamble. "I have no intention of changing that. This marriage is primarily an alliance. You will be Duchess, manage the household, and oversee charitable works. In return, you will have security, independence from your mother, and freedom to pursue your own interests within reason." "And in private?" Hazel asked, proud that her voice stayed steady. "What are your expectations there?" His expression shuttered. "I won't force you into anything, if that's your concern. Our private relationship will develop only if both of us clearly want it to. I'm not a beast, Miss Fairchild, despite what you may have heard." "You promised to take my innocence," Hazel said bluntly. "What did you mean?" Lucian was silent for a long moment, studying her with those intense grey eyes. "I meant," he said finally, "that the world you've known, whatever illusions you hold about society, about people, about how this life works, will not survive in this house. I am not a fairy tale prince. This will not be a love match. If you come here expecting tenderness or romance, I will inevitably disappoint you. That's what I meant by taking your innocence. Not," he gestured vaguely, "not anything more sinister. I'm 24, Your Grace. I stopped believing in fairy tales long ago." Hazel folded her hands in her lap. "I understand exactly what this marriage is. You need a wife who won't demand your participation in society. I need security and a purpose beyond being my mother's disappointment. We can provide those things for each other without pretending this is anything it's not." "Good." He stood, clearly relieved. "The ceremony is in an hour. The vicar is waiting in the chapel. It will be simple, no grand affair. I wouldn't expect otherwise." As Hazel moved toward the door, Lucian's voice stopped her. "Miss Fairchild?" Hazel? She turned back. I truly am sorry about last night, he said quietly. You deserved better than that introduction. Hazel studied him, this man who would be her husband in an hour. This stranger with shadows in his eyes and walls around his heart. We all deserve better than what we get, she said. But we work with what we have. The wedding was exactly as promised. Simple, brief, perfunctory. The chapel was small and cold, with only the vicar, 2 elderly servants as witnesses, and a handful of staff watching from the back pews. The vicar's hands shook as he conducted the ceremony, making Hazel wonder what stories he'd heard about the beastly Duke. The ring stuck when Lucian tried to slide it onto her finger, requiring an awkward moment of twisting before it settled into place. Her veil caught on his sleeve when they turned to face each other, tangling them together until Lucian carefully freed it. When the vicar pronounced them married, Lucian didn't kiss her lips. He raised her hand instead and pressed a brief, formal kiss to her knuckles. His lips were warm against her skin, there and gone in a heartbeat. Your Grace, he murmured. Your Grace, she echoed, and just like that, Hazel Fairchild became the Duchess of Ravenscar. The household staff assembled to meet their new mistress. Mrs. Alden, the head housekeeper, was a woman of perhaps 50, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. Welcome to Ravenscar, Your Grace, she said, dropping a curtsy that somehow managed to convey skepticism. I've managed this household for 20 years. If you need anything, you've only to ask. Thank you, Mrs. Alden. Hazel smiled. I'm sure I'll need your guidance frequently. I've never managed an estate this size. Something in Mrs. Alden's expression softened fractionally. You'll learn quickly enough. You seem the practical sort. There was that word again. Practical. Mr. Pike, the steward, was a stolid man with no nonsense about him. He showed Hazel the estate ledgers and explained the various holdings with brisk efficiency. She noticed anonymous donations recorded for widows and orphans, generous payments to tenant families in hardship. His Grace doesn't like it mentioned, Mr. Pike said when she questioned one particularly large sum, but he paid for young William's sister to have surgery in London. Saved her life, most like. He doesn't want it known, says it's simply sound estate management. Healthy tenants are productive tenants. Mr. Pike's weathered face creased with something like affection, but we know better. That evening, Hazel retreated to her rooms, still separate from Lucian's chambers, and tried to process everything. She was a duchess now. She had duties, responsibilities, a household to manage. She also had a husband who kept his kindness secret, who frightened servants with his reputation, while quietly paying for their family's medical care. As she prepared for bed, she heard voices drifting from the servants' quarters below the kitchen maids, gossiping in undertones they thought she couldn't hear. They say his mother died of scandal, one whispered. The fine ladies of London destroyed her with gossip, and she couldn't bear the shame. That's why he hates them all, another voice added. Especially the beautiful ones. They're the cruelest, aren't they? At least her Grace is plain. Maybe she'll last. Hazel closed the window quietly, her chest tight. The beastly Duke wasn't a beast at all. He was a wounded man who'd built walls so high that even his own kindness couldn't escape them, and she'd just promised to spend her life inside those walls with him. 3. The first few weeks of marriage established a careful routine. Hazel managed the household with Mrs. Alden's grudging approval, walked the estate grounds, and spent evenings reading in the library. Lucian appeared at dinner, where they discussed estate business with the formality of business partners, then retreated to his study or his rooms. They were polite, cordial, utterly separate. The first crack in their careful distance came with Sir Edwin Hartley's visit. Sir Edwin owned the neighbouring estate and had, according to Mrs. Alden's whispered warning, been trying to purchase Ravenscar land for years. Lucian refused to sell, which had created tension between the families. Dinner was a tense affair. Sir Edwin was a florid man with calculating eyes who smiled too much and spoke too little truth. "Marriage suits you, Ravenscar," he said over the fish course, his tone suggesting the opposite. "Though I confess surprise at your choice. I'd have thought you'd want someone more decorative to help with your reputation." Hazel felt Lucian stiffen beside her. Her own hands tightened on her fork. "My wife," Lucian said coldly, "suits me perfectly." "Oh, of course, of course." Sir Edwin waved a dismissive hand. "I meant no offence. Simply that a man in your position, with your particular history, might benefit from a wife who enjoys society, who could help rehabilitate your standing." "I have no interest in rehabilitation," Lucian replied. "No, I suppose not." Sir Edwin turned his attention to Hazel, his smile sharpening. "And you, your Grace? Do you not miss London? The assemblies, the theatre, the company of other ladies?" Hazel met his eyes steadily. "I find that loyalty to one's land and people is far more valuable than social standing, Sir Edwin. My husband's dedication to Ravenscar is admirable, not shameful." Sir Edwin's eyebrows rose. "Quite the champion you've found, Ravenscar. The plain Duchess has teeth." The silence that followed was arctic. Lucian's jaw worked, his hand tightening around his wineglass. "I think," Hazel said calmly, "that you've overstayed your welcome, Sir Edwin. My husband is too polite to say so, but I am not. Good evening." Sir Edwin gaped. Then, realizing she was serious, he stood with barely concealed fury and departed. After the door closed behind him, Lucian turned to Hazel. "That was unwise. He's a powerful man in this county. He was insulting you, and me. I won't sit quietly while someone demeans us in our own home. He was repeating what everyone thinks. Then everyone is wrong." Hazel stood, suddenly tired of the careful distance between them. "I'm going to the library. Good night, Your Grace." She was curled in a window seat with a book when Lucian found her 2 hours later. He stood in the doorway, studying her in the lamplight. "Why did you defend me?" he asked abruptly. Hazel looked up from her book. "Why wouldn't I? You barely know me. You clearly have doubts about this marriage." "I hate gossip," Hazel interrupted. "I've watched it destroy people my entire life. Women smiling at each other over tea while shredding reputations with whispered lies. Men ruining each other with calculated rumours. I won't participate in it, and I won't tolerate it in my presence." Lucian moved into the room, his expression troubled. "You don't understand how vicious society can be, how cruel the aristocracy." "I understand perfectly." Hazel set down her book. "You think innocence means ignorance, but it doesn't. I've seen cruelty. I've experienced it. I simply refuse to become cruel myself, just because the world is harsh. That attitude will get you hurt. Perhaps, but becoming hard and bitter will hurt me worse." She stood to face him. "You keep talking about my innocence like it's some fragile thing you're going to destroy. But innocence isn't fragility, Your Grace. It's strength. It's choosing, after seeing the worst of people, to still believe in better." Lucian stared at her, something raw and vulnerable flickering across his face. Then he moved to pour himself brandy from the sideboard, his back to her. "My mother was innocent," he said quietly. "She believed in people, in society, in the goodness of others." Hazel waited, sensing the importance of what he was about to share. "She was the gentlest person I've ever known. Loved music, loved people, wanted nothing more than to belong." His voice roughened. When I was 15, a rumour started that she'd had an affair with our music master. It was false completely, utterly false. But society didn't care about truth. They cared about scandal. He drank deeply, staring at nothing. The gossip rags printed cartoons. Drawing rooms fed on her humiliation. Former friends cut her. The Ton destroyed her piece by piece, all while smiling to her face. Lucian, she couldn't bear it. The shame, the whispers, the way people looked at her. He set down his glass with careful control. She took laudanum, too much, on purpose. I found her. Hazel's breath caught. I'm so sorry. I was young, but old enough to remember every word they printed about her. Every smirk, every whispered joke. He finally turned to face her. I swore I would never forgive the people who profited from her pain. I withdrew from society, focused on my estates, and refused to let anyone close enough to hurt me that way again. That's why you live here, why you avoid London. That's why I hate Innocence, he said flatly. Because innocence gets destroyed. Because believing in people's goodness is what killed my mother. I can smell it on you, Hazel, that stubborn belief that people can be better, that the world is fundamentally good. And it terrifies me, because I know what happens to people like you, like her. Hazel moved toward him slowly. Then let me tell you about my innocence, Lucian. I'm 24 years old. Do you know how many times I was asked to dance at assemblies? Only when men wanted to appear polite to the plain wallflower. Do you know how many proposals I received before yours? None. I've spent my entire life being overlooked, dismissed, considered useful rather than desirable. My own mother called me practical breeding stock. She stopped an arm's length away. I've been hurt. I've been humiliated. I've sat through countless dinners where people spoke around me as though I wasn't there. And yes, I still believe people can be better. Not because I'm naive, but because the alternative, becoming bitter and hard like them, would mean they won. Lucian's grey eyes searched hers. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Your mother's death was tragic and cruel, but it wasn't her innocence that killed her. It was other people's cruelty. Those are not the same thing. The result is identical. No. Hazel shook her head. One is victimhood. The other is choice. I choose not to be cruel. Every day, I choose it. That doesn't make me weak or doomed. It makes me human. The silence stretched between them, charged with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Lucian spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Come with me. I want to show you something. He led her through darkened corridors to a part of the house Hazel hadn't yet explored. They emerged into what had once been a glass house, a winter garden with soaring glass walls and overgrown plants tangling together in wild profusion. My mother built this, Lucian said, his voice echoing in the empty space. She loved growing things. After she died, I couldn't bear to come here. The staff maintains it minimally, but he gestured at the chaos of neglected beauty. It's magnificent, Hazel breathed, moving among the vines and abandoned planters. Sad, but magnificent. Do what you wish with it. Lucian remained in the doorway, as though afraid to enter fully. Destroy it, or restore it. I can't look at it, but I trust you to decide. Hazel turned to him, understanding the enormity of what he was offering. This wasn't about gardens. This was about trust. About letting her into the parts of his life he'd kept locked away. I'd like to bring it back, she said softly. Not as it was, but as something new. Something that honors what it was while being its own thing. Lucian's throat worked. I kill every plant I touch. Despite everything, Hazel smiled. Then it's good you focused on estate management instead of flower shops. A surprised laugh escaped him, brief, rusty, but genuine. They stood in the moonlit glasshouse, surrounded by neglected beauty, and Hazel felt something shift between them. A gust of wind rattled the glass. Hazel stumbled on an uneven paver, and Lucian moved instinctively, catching her. His hands were warm on her arms, just like that first night in the corridor, but entirely different. They stood too close, looking at each other for a heartbeat too long. Hazel could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between want and fear. Then Lucian released her abruptly and stepped back. "It's late. We should return to the house." He walked away, leaving Hazel alone among the tangled vines, her heart racing and her thoughts in turmoil. The beastly Duke was falling for her. She could see it in every careful distance he maintained, every wall he reinforced between them. And God help her, she was falling for him too. For word of Lucian's sudden marriage reached London faster than either of them expected. 3 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived from his godfather, Lord Ashworth, written in the firm hand of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Hazel found Lucian in his study, staring at the letter with an expression that made her stomach clench. "What's wrong?" He looked up, his face carefully blank. "My godfather insists on visiting, along with several of his concerned friends, who wish to meet my new wife and assure themselves I haven't locked you in the tower. Have you?" A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Not yet." "Then what's the problem?" "The problem," Lucian said, setting down the letter with controlled precision, "is that he's proposing an autumn house party. Here, 10 guests for a week. He claims it's necessary to quiet the rumours circulating about our marriage." "What rumours?" "That you're terrified of me, that I married beneath myself out of desperation, that I keep you isolated like a prisoner." His jaw tightened. The usual gossip. Hazel moved to his desk, studying his face. He looked tired, she realized. The shadows under his eyes had deepened, and lines of tension bracketed his mouth. "We could refuse," she said quietly. "Ashworth won't accept a refusal. He's been like a father to me since mine died, and he's right. Hiding forever will only make the gossip worse." He met her eyes. "But I won't force you to endure this, Hazel. If you want to say no, we will." There it was again, that unexpected consideration, that careful respect for her wishes. The beastly Duke, who wasn't a beast at all. "What if we compromise?" Hazel suggested. "A limited gathering. We control the guest list. We set the terms. And if at any point I'm uncomfortable, we end it." Lucian studied her with something like wonder. "You'd do that? Face society here? I'd rather face it on our terms than let them create their own narrative." Hazel smiled wryly. "Besides, I'm the practical Duchess, remember? This is practical." "You're remarkable," he said softly, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. The next 2 weeks were chaos. Mrs. Alden and Hazel worked from dawn to dusk, preparing rooms, planning menus, and organizing entertainment. The cook insisted on feeding guests enough for an army. The maids panicked over candle shortages and proper linens. Hazel found herself enjoying it, the purpose, the activity, the way the staff began to relax around her and offer suggestions instead of waiting for orders. Lucian watched from the sidelines, and Hazel felt his gaze like a physical touch. She'd catch him observing her as she discussed wine selections with the butler, as she remembered servants' names without effort, as she used her plain, unremarkable face to move through the house like a benevolent ghost, seeing everything. The guests arrived on a crisp October afternoon. Lord Ashworth was exactly as Hazel expected, elderly, sharp-eyed, protective of Lucian in a way that suggested deep affection. His wife, the Dowager Lady Ashworth, had been a friend to Lucian's mother and studied Hazel with obvious skepticism. The other guests were a mixed group. A young rake named Bellamy, who seemed determined to test boundaries. A graceful widow named Mrs. Whitmore, who'd clearly once hoped to marry Lucian herself, and several other couples of varying ages and temperaments. The first dinner was an exercise in careful navigation. Hazel, dressed in a gown of deep plum that Mrs. Alden had commissioned, simple but elegant, nothing that tried to compete with the genuine beauties present. She took her place at the table and felt every eye assess her. Plain Duchess, practical choice, convenient arrangement. The conversation flowed around predictable topics: London gossip, political machinations, estate management. Hazel listened more than she spoke, observing dynamics and measuring personalities. Then Bellamy, flushed with wine and emboldened by the appreciative laughter of his friends, made his move. "Tell me, Your Grace," he said, his voice carrying down the table. "Is it true what they say about innocence and beasts, that His Grace has quite the appetite?" He waggled his eyebrows suggestively, and several guests gasped at the crude implication. Hazel felt Lucian go rigid beside her. His hand tightened on his fork, knuckles white. He was about to explode. She could feel the fury building in him like a storm. She touched his arm gently, staying him, then turned to Bellamy with a calm smile. "I've found, Mr. Bellamy, that the true beasts are never the ones society labels as such. True beasts hide behind gossip and crude jokes because they lack the courage to face their own inadequacies. They mistake cruelty for wit and vulgarity for sophistication." She paused, her smile never wavering. "I assume that's not what you meant to demonstrate this evening?" The table fell silent. Bellamy's face flushed deeper, this time with embarrassment rather than wine. Several of the older guests, including the Dowager Lady Ashworth, smiled with open approval. "Well said, Your Grace," the Dowager murmured. "Very well said indeed." The conversation resumed on safer topics. Under the table, Lucian's hand found Hazel's, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of gratitude and something deeper. That night, after the guests had retired, Lucian came to her sitting room. He didn't knock, simply entered and closed the door behind him. "You didn't have to defend me," he said without preamble. "Yes, I did." Hazel set aside her book. He was being cruel and vulgar. Someone needed to stop him. You could have been hurt by it. "The gossip will happen regardless of what I do," Hazel stood. "Lucian, I'm not made of glass. I'm not going to shatter because some drunk fool makes a crude joke." He moved toward her, his expression raw. "I was wrong." "About what?" "About your innocence. About what it means." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the conflict in his eyes. "I thought it made you weak, vulnerable, something I needed to protect or destroy. But you're not weak, Hazel. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met, and I've been terrified of that strength." "Why terrified?" "Because you see me," he said simply. "Not the Duke, not the beast, not the title or the wealth. You see me. The man who still mourns his mother. The man who pays for tenants' medical care in secret because he doesn't know how else to show he cares. The man who's spent 15 years building walls because he's afraid of being hurt again." Hazel's breath caught. "Lucian, I've wanted you from the moment you stood in my study and made that joke about creeping more audibly. But I've been terrified of repeating my parents' misery, of making you into another casualty of society's cruelty, of loving you and losing you like I lost her." "You won't lose me," Hazel whispered. "How can you know that?" "Because I'm not your mother and you're not your father. We're us two wounded people who've chosen to trust each other despite every reason not to." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the warmth of his skin, the roughness of day-old stubble. I'm drawn to you, Lucian, not to your title or your wealth, but to you, the man who shows his kindness through actions instead of words, the man who's learning to let people in again. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, his voice rough. How to be a real husband instead of a distant one. Neither do I. But we can learn together. Hazel smiled. We're both practical people, after all. We'll figure it out. Lucian pulled her close, his arms coming around her with desperate tenderness. I'm falling in love with you, Hazel. God help me. I'm falling in love with my convenient wife, and I don't know how to stop. Then don't stop, she whispered against his chest. Don't stop, and don't let fear make you push me away again. He kissed her then, not like their wedding kiss, brief and formal, but with the passion of a man who'd been holding himself back for too long. Hazel kissed him back with equal fervour, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Lucian rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight, he said, not in separate chambers, not as a duty, but as my wife, my partner, my choice. Yes, Hazel breathed. Yes to all of it. They made their way to his chambers, hand in hand. Two people who'd started as strangers and become something neither of them had expected. A partnership built on honesty, respect, and the courage to be vulnerable. That night, for the first time, they shared not just a house and a name, but a bed and a future they were both finally brave enough to claim. 5. The weeks following the house party brought a new rhythm to Ravenscar. The gossip didn't stop entirely, it never would, but the immediate scandal faded. Some of the guests who'd come skeptical left charmed by Hazel's quiet competence and the obvious connection between the Duke and Duchess. Hazel restored the winter garden with Mrs. Alden's help, bringing in new plants and repairing the glass. Lucian couldn't bring himself to work there, but he would sit in the doorway and watch her tend the flowers, something like peace settling over his features. They were building something real, something that felt like more than convenience or duty. Then the scandal sheet arrived. Hazel found it in Lucian's study, the London gossip rag spread across his desk. The headline made her stomach turn. The beastly Duke's plain bride, a cautionary tale of innocence, traded for a coronet. The article was vicious. It dredged up every detail of Lucian's mother's death, every rumour about his coldness, every whisper about Hazel's unremarkable looks and desperate circumstances. It painted their marriage as a sordid transaction, a frightened girl, sold to a monster, trapped in isolation while he fed on her naivety. Lucian stood at the window, his back to her, every line of his body rigid with barely controlled fury. Lucian, don't. His voice was harsh. Don't try to comfort me. Don't tell me it doesn't matter. This is exactly what I feared. Exactly what killed my mother. The same pattern repeating. It's not the same, isn't it? He turned, and the anguish in his eyes cut her. They're destroying you now, Hazel. Just like they destroyed her, making you a figure of pity and ridicule. And for what? For loving me? For having the misfortune to marry a man society has labelled a beast? I don't care what they write. You should care. You should run before they tear you apart piece by piece the way they did her. Hazel moved to him, gripping his arms. I'm not running, and I'm not your mother. I'm stronger than you think. And I'm not going to let some London gossip rag dictate my life. They'll destroy you. They'll try, Hazel corrected, and they'll fail. Because unlike your mother, I have you beside me. We're facing this together, not alone. She released him and moved to the desk, studying the article with a calculating eye. An idea was forming, risky, bold, but possibly effective. I'm going to London, she said. Lucian stared at her. Absolutely not. I'm going to London, Hazel repeated calmly, with Mrs. Alden and Mr. Pike for propriety. I'm going to visit the editor of this rag, and I'm going to give him a better story. Hazel, no, it's too dangerous. They'll eat you alive. They'll try, she said again, meeting his eyes. But I'm not some frightened girl, Lucian. I'm a woman who survived years of being dismissed and overlooked. I know how to handle people who underestimate me. She moved back to him, taking his hands. Your mother faced them alone and hurt. I'm facing them strong and supported. Trust me, please. The London editor's office smelled of ink and desperation. Hazel sat across from Mr. Grimsby, a thin man with calculating eyes, and refused to be intimidated. Your Grace, he said with false warmth. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? I'm here about your recent article, Hazel said calmly. The one about my marriage. Ah, yes. Quite popular, that piece. Our readers do enjoy a good scandal. I'm sure they do. Hazel folded her hands in her lap. Tell me, Mr. Grimsby, do you have a mother? He blinked at the unexpected question. Yes, of course. Did she love you? Sacrifice for you? Want better for you than what she had? What does that have to do with? The Duchess who died 15 years ago was someone's mother too. A real woman with real feelings who loved her son desperately. Your article treated her death as entertainment, made her suffering into a punchline for your readers' amusement. Hazel's voice remained steady, but her eyes were hard. Do you truly want to be part of that story again? To profit from another woman's pain? Grimsby shifted uncomfortably. It's simply news, Your Grace. People want to know. Then give them something worth knowing. Hazel leaned forward. I'm proposing an alternative. An honest piece about Ravenscar's charitable work. About the school my husband and I are founding for estate children. About the jobs we're creating in the village. About a marriage between two people who chose each other despite society's expectations. That's hardly scandalous enough for our readers, isn't it? Hazel smiled slightly. A reclusive duke emerging from isolation. A plain woman proving that value isn't measured in beauty. Two wounded people building something real instead of entertaining society with their pain. That's a far better story than your cheap gossip. She stood. You can print what you like, Mr. Grimsby, but if you choose cruelty over truth again, if you profit from destroying others, remember that you made that choice and live with it. She walked out before he could respond, her heart pounding but her head high. The article that appeared 2 weeks later surprised everyone. It wasn't fawning or false, but it was honest. It described Ravenscar's charitable initiatives, quoted villagers who praised the Duke's generosity, and portrayed Hazel and Lucian as a serious, private couple dedicated to their land and people. It didn't romanticize them, but it humanized them. When Hazel returned to Ravenscar, Lucian met her in the entrance hall. He looked haggard, as though he hadn't slept since she'd left. I thought you'd left me, he said roughly. I thought you'd finally realized what a mistake this marriage was and decided to run. I went to fight for us, Hazel corrected, showing him the article. And I won. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. No one has ever fought for me before, only against me. Get used to it, Hazel said against his chest. I'm your wife, your partner, your choice, and I'm not going anywhere. That evening, they walked in the winter garden together. The restoration was nearly complete, plants thriving, glass repaired. The space transformed from a monument to grief into a living sanctuary. Lucian pulled Hazel close, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and lavender that had haunted him since their first meeting in that dark corridor. "I can still smell your innocence," he murmured with a wry smile. "You stubbornly kept it, and somehow gave some of it back to me." Hazel laughed, turning in his arms. "Good. Someone has to keep the beast from becoming a real monster again." "I was never a beast." "No," she agreed softly. "You were just a wounded man pretending to be one. But you don't have to pretend anymore." They kissed as the sun set over the sea, two people who'd started with threats and fear and built something neither had expected, a partnership based on honesty, a love that had survived society's worst, and a future they would face together. The gossip would never entirely stop. There would always be whispers about the beastly Duke and his plain bride. But Hazel and Lucian had learned something essential, that the opinions of strangers mattered far less than the life they built with their own hands. Years later, when their children played in the winter garden and villagers greeted them with genuine warmth, when the reputation of Ravenscar had transformed from isolation to sanctuary, Hazel would remember that first night in the corridor. "I can smell your innocence, and I will be the one to take it from you." Lucian had been right, in a way. He had taken something from her, the innocence of isolation, the safety of emotional distance. But in return, he'd given her something far more valuable, a partnership built on truth, a love that had survived being tested, and the knowledge that she was strong enough to face anything. They'd both been wounded, they'd both been labelled, and together they'd built a life that proved the labels wrong. "Do you regret it?" she asked him one evening, years into their marriage, as they sat in their favourite spot in the garden. "Marrying you? Never." Lucian pulled her closer. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Hazel. My convenient wife, who became my greatest love. And you're mine," she said simply. "My beastly Duke, who was never a beast at all." They sat together as twilight fell, two people who'd learned that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that start with fear and end with courage, the ones where broken people choose to heal each other instead of hiding from the pain. The end. Thank you for joining Hazel and Lucian's journey from fear to trust, from convenience to profound love. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more tales of wounded hearts learning to love again. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been judged by a reputation that didn't tell your whole story? How did you move past it? I'd love to hear your experiences.